The sun had long since vanished beneath the black horizon of Kelver 7, a desolate mining world ruled by the Varnok Dominion. Dust storms howled through the barren plains as a cruel wind tugged at the ragged clothes of human prisoners, their faces gaunt from hunger and the never-ending labor. Among them, Lyra Dawson moved slowly, her hands raw and trembling from the endless pounding of rock against stone. The Varnok had taken everything from her, the earth she once knew, her family, her bright future as an astrophysicist, but they hadn't taken her mind. She still thought, still planned, and most of all, she still dreamed. Each night, as she lay on the cold, rough ground, she imagined the stars above her home, imagining a world where she wasn't just another slave. But those thoughts had to be kept hidden. The Varnok didn't tolerate hope. They called humans beasts, lesser beings fit only for grunt work, for breaking their backs beneath the weight of their orders. Their monstrous overseers watched every movement with cold reptilian eyes, their forearms ready to strike at the slightest sign of rebellion. But today, something was different. Lyra's eyes narrowed as she scanned the distant cliffs, her heart racing. A faint glimmer of light flickered in the distance. She wasn't sure if it was the burning sky playing tricks on her, but for the first time since being captured, a feeling that she could not ignore tugged at her chest. This was no ordinary storm. This was something more, a spark. Lyra pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the work at hand. She had to keep her head down. The last thing she needed was attention from the overseers. But as the hours dragged on, the nagging feeling wouldn't leave her. She glanced to the side, where Caleb Rise, a tall, broad-shouldered soldier from Earth, was hammering away at the stone beside her. His face was as weathered as hers, marked by the scars of endless battles fought both in the war for Earth's freedom and in the war to survive in this hellish prison. Caleb didn't speak much, and when he did, it was always in short, measured words. Yet, there was an understanding between them, a silent bond forged in the fires of shared hardship. She caught his eye now, and without a word, he nodded toward the cliffs. A flicker of light was still there, almost imperceptible. Lyra's pulse quickened. It wasn't just her imagination. There was something down there, something important. The prisoners who had come to this world in the beginning had no hope of escape. They had been broken, beaten, forgotten. But now, with the glimmer at the cliff's edge, the faintest whisper of freedom reached Lyra's heart. It was just a sliver of possibility, but it was enough to spark something in her. As the evening wore on and the overseers moved off to prepare for their evening ritual, Lyra motioned for Caleb to follow her. He hesitated for only a moment before rising to his feet. The two of them slipped into the shadows, moving quickly and quietly as they made their way toward the distant cliffs. The wind whipped around them, kicking up dust, but the darkness cloaked them from the overseers' prying eyes. They reached the base of the cliffs, where the glimmer of light had been. There, buried deep in the stone, Lyra spotted a strange set of markings, etched into the rock. It wasn't Varnok's script. She was sure of it. These were human symbols, old and worn with time, but undeniably human. Caleb leaned over her shoulder, his breath shallow as he studied the markings. "What do you think it is?" he asked, his voice low. Lyra didn't answer immediately. Her eyes traced the symbols, her mind working through the possibilities. It was as if the rock itself had been carved with a purpose, a message hidden from the Varnok. But there was something more, something that felt alive. A faint hum seemed to emanate from the stone, as though it resonated with an energy she couldn't quite understand. Then it clicked. This wasn't just a map or a message. It was a key to something larger. Something that could change everything. This is a way out, Lyra whispered, barely believing it herself. But it's more than that. It's the key to, I don't know, something buried here. Caleb's eyes widened. He wasn't one for hope, but he trusted Lyra's judgment. "Are you sure?" he asked. She met his gaze, her own filled with determination. "I'm sure." As she ran her fingers over the symbols, something strange happened. The rock beneath her hand shifted, as if it were alive. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a narrow passage leading deep into the cliffside. A cold draft of air rushed out from within, carrying the scent of dust and something older. Something ancient. Caleb stepped back, eyes wide. What is that? Lyra didn't answer. She was already moving forward, her curiosity pushing her past the growing fear. There was something down there, something that had been waiting for centuries, maybe millennia. As she stepped into the passage, she felt a sudden surge of energy, something so powerful that it almost knocked her off her feet. She steadied herself, her pulse racing, her heart thundering in her chest. Caleb followed, his hand instinctively reaching for the blaster at his side. But this wasn't the time for weapons. They were entering something far bigger than anything the Varnok could understand. Something lost to time. The walls of the passage were smooth, almost unnaturally so. The air was heavy, filled with the weight of history. The deeper they went, the more Lyra felt it, the hum of power, ancient and untapped, waiting to be awakened. As they rounded a corner, they came to a large, open chamber. At its center was a massive, obelisk-like structure, covered in more symbols that felt familiar. These weren't the markings of the Varnok or even humanity. These were something older, something more refined. The structure hummed with energy, and a voice, ancient and echoing, filled the chamber. "You have found it, human," it said, its tone deep and resonant. "The Ascendants speak through this relic. Only those who possess true may awaken it." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The Ascendants? The legends? She had thought them myth. But this was real. And the voice that spoke now seemed to pierce through her very soul. It knew her. And in that moment, Lyra knew everything had changed. They were no longer just slaves. They were something more. The chamber pulsed with energy, an ancient hum that seemed to shake the very air around Lyra and Caleb. The voice that spoke to them from the heart of the obelisk was not like anything they had ever heard before. It was neither mechanical nor organic. It was a presence, vast and far-reaching, as though it came from something beyond the stars themselves. "Only those who possess true will may awaken it," the voice echoed, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. Lyra's pulse quickened as she glanced at Caleb. He was standing motionless, his eyes fixed on the structure before them, his hands still resting near his blaster, though it was clear he wasn't sure whether to draw it or not. She could see the same doubt in his eyes that was in her own heart. What were they dealing with? Was this a trap? Or had they truly stumbled upon something that could change everything? A voice stirred in her mind, almost like a whisper. "It's real, Lyra. We've found it." She felt the pull, a magnetic force that seemed to draw her toward the obelisk, but she hesitated. What if they weren't ready for what lay ahead? What if they had already gone too far? Caleb took a step forward, his boots clattering on the stone floor. "I don't know about you, but I'm not here to sit around," he muttered, his voice steady. "We're already this deep. We need to know what's down here." His words stirred something in Lyra. He was right. They were far beyond the point of retreat now. She wasn't about to turn back. Not when they'd already come so far. With a deep breath, she stepped closer to the obelisk. As her hand reached out to touch the cold stone, the hum grew louder, vibrating in her bones. The symbols that covered the surface of the monument seemed to glow faintly, as though responding to her touch. She hesitated for a brief second, then pressed her palm firmly against the surface. Instantly, the world around her seemed to shift. The chamber dissolved into a blinding light, and for a moment, Lyra was weightless, floating in a sea of stars. Her breath caught in her throat as visions flooded her mind. She saw a civilization that had existed long before the Varnok, long before humanity itself. Beings of light and energy moved through vast, starry cities. They spoke a language without words, their thoughts intertwined in a collective consciousness. And then she saw it, the Ascendants, the ones who had left the relic behind. They had reached the pinnacle of existence, transcending their physical forms, becoming something more than mere matter. They had left a legacy, a gift for those who would come after them. And that gift was in their hands now. Lyra gasped, feeling the weight of the knowledge in her mind. She pulled her hand away from the obelisk, and the vision faded, leaving her gasping for air. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and her eyes were wide with disbelief. What had just happened? Was it a memory or a vision of something to come? Caleb was standing beside her, his face pale. He had watched her touch the obelisk, watched as she had seemed to enter another world. "Lyra, what the hell was that?" His voice was low, a mix of awe and fear. Lyra shook her head, still trying to piece together the fragments of the vision. I don't know. It was like I saw the Ascendants, like I became them. They were beyond us, beyond anything we've ever known. And yet, they left us this. This relic. It's a key to something greater. Caleb frowned, looking at the structure with a newfound respect. So, what now? What do we do with it? Before she could respond, the voice filled the chamber again, this time more urgent. The path is open to those who seek the truth. But beware, the journey is not without its trials. Lyra's stomach twisted at the words. A trial? What kind of trial? She wasn't sure, but something deep within her told her that they were only at the beginning. A massive rumble shook the floor beneath their feet, causing the walls of the chamber to tremble. Caleb reached out and grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her back toward the entrance. "We need to go now," he urged. "The Varnok are going to notice that something's wrong. We don't have much time." But Lyra didn't move. She stared at the obelisk, feeling its pull once more. The chamber was alive with energy, and it was almost as if the structure was calling to her, urging her to stay. She had the strange feeling that they were not alone. Something is coming, she thought. But before she could speak, another sound echoed from the darkness ahead. A scraping noise like something ancient awakening from a long, slumbering sleep. It was distant at first, but it grew louder, closer, until it seemed to reverberate through the entire chamber. Caleb's grip on her arm tightened. "Lyra, we have to move. Now." But Lyra was already stepping forward, drawn by an invisible force, deeper into the heart of the underground complex. She couldn't explain why, but she felt as though they had to face whatever was coming. Whatever this was, it was part of the journey. A flicker of light appeared ahead, faint but unmistakable. It grew brighter as they advanced, and the temperature around them dropped, a coldness creeping into the air. Caleb muttered a curse under his breath. "We're in this together, Dawson," he said, his voice firm, though there was no mistaking the tension in his tone. "But I swear, if this turns into another trap, I'm not going down without a fight." "Just follow me," Lyra replied, her voice steady despite the rising fear. "We'll figure it out. Together." They moved through the twisting passages, the noise behind them now growing louder and louder. The scraping sound was accompanied by a low, guttural growl, a sound that sent chills down Lyra's spine. They were not alone. Something was coming, and it wasn't human. It wasn't Varnok either. It was something older, something that had been hidden in the depths of this world for centuries. The walls around them began to change. No longer were they smooth and ancient, but now they were rough and jagged, like the bones of some giant creature long forgotten. The hum of the obelisk seemed to fade as they pressed forward, replaced by the heavy sound of their footsteps echoing through the corridors. And then they reached a vast open chamber. The sight before them made Lyra stop dead in her tracks. At the center of the room was a massive structure, one that dwarfed the obelisk. It was a skeleton, but not any ordinary one. This was the skeleton of a titan, its bones stretched out and twisted, woven through the very foundation of the cavern. And within its ribcage, a faint blue light pulsed a heartbeat. Whatever this creature was, it had been here for a long time, and it was still alive. The sight of the titan's skeleton left Lyra and Caleb in stunned silence. The bones stretched across the cavern like the remnants of some forgotten god, ancient and colossal, the massive ribcage looming like the hull of a shipwrecked vessel. The blue light pulsed within, sending faint echoes through the cavern, almost like the heartbeat of a long-dead beast. The silence was suffocating. They weren't alone. Lyra could feel it, an undeniable presence, like the walls themselves were watching. The scraping sound from before had stopped, but something else had taken its place, something far more dangerous. The air felt heavier now, colder, and the weight of history pressed down on them. Caleb's hand instinctively moved to his blaster, but Lyra stopped him with a gesture. She wasn't sure what they were dealing with, but they couldn't afford to make any sudden moves. Not yet. She took a deep breath and stepped closer to the Titan's skeletal form. The light inside its ribcage flickered again, casting long shadows across the room. She could almost feel the ancient power resonating from it. Whatever had once lived inside this creature, it wasn't just a beast, it was something else, something more than any one species. The Titan had been a force of nature. This is bigger than anything we've imagined, Caleb said quietly, his voice tight with awe. What are we supposed to do with this? We can't fight something like this. Lyra didn't answer immediately. Her mind raced as she scanned the room. They weren't just in some old ruin. This was something far more important, something buried by time itself. The question was, why had it been hidden? Who had left it behind and for what purpose? As her eyes moved across the bones, she saw something else, markings, similar to the ones on the obelisk, carved deep into the Titan's bones. The symbols glowed faintly, as though calling to her. She stepped closer, running her fingers over the etchings. They were more intricate than anything she'd seen before, and yet they felt familiar, like fragments of a puzzle she'd almost solved. A soft hum filled the air, vibrating through the bones of the Titan. The energy was building again. Without warning, the ground beneath them trembled. A deep rumbling echoed from the far side of the cavern, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Something was coming. It wasn't a figure. It wasn't a single being. It was something more. Caleb's hand flew to his sidearm. Lyra held him back. "Wait," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She didn't know what was coming, but she had a feeling that they needed to be ready. They stepped into the shadows, blending into the darkness, their breaths shallow. The rumble grew louder, and then, emerging from the dark passageways leading deeper into the caves, came the first of them. They were humans, but not like the ones Lyra had seen before. These were different. Clad in armor that gleamed with an unnatural, almost ethereal sheen, they moved with a precision and fluidity that was otherworldly. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, but there was no mistaking the power in their movements. They were soldiers, but not like any soldiers Lyra had ever known. The leader, a tall figure with a massive rifle slung across his back, stepped forward and paused, as if sensing their presence. His voice, deep and commanding, echoed through the cavern. "You've come for it, haven't you?" The voice was familiar. It was a tone she had heard before, one of resolve, of defiance. It was human. Caleb didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his posture rigid with military discipline. "Who are you?" The figure lowered his helmet, revealing a pair of glowing, bright eyes. His face was scarred, battle-hardened. "We are the Iron Choir," he said, his voice like the rumble of thunder. "And you are not the first to awaken the relics of the Ascendants. But you are the first to reach this point." Lyra stepped closer, her curiosity piqued. "The Iron Choir? I've never heard of you." The leader tilted his head slightly, as if studying her. "We are the last of the resistance. The ones who survived the Varnok's purge. And we've been waiting for someone like you. Someone who could uncover what the Ascendants left behind." The words struck Lyra like a blow. Resistance? The Varnok had purged countless worlds, but she had thought all hope of fighting back had been lost. She had been wrong. "What do you mean?" Caleb asked, his voice low and careful. "The Ascendants were supposed to be a myth." The leader shook his head. "They were real. And their technology is far beyond anything the Varnok can understand. We have studied the relics, this Titan, the obelisk, everything. The Ascendants left behind a path, a legacy. But it's not for the weak." Lyra felt a surge of excitement, a spark of hope. "And you want us to join you?" she asked, the question lingering in the air. The leader gave a single nod. "Yes. The Iron Choir needs new blood. We've been fighting for too long, and now we have a chance to break free. To take the fight to the Varnok, to show them what humanity is truly capable of." The words echoed in Lyra's mind, resonating with a truth she had never allowed herself to fully believe before. They had a chance, but it wasn't going to be easy. She glanced at Caleb, who was already nodding. He didn't hesitate. "Count us in," he said, his voice full of resolve. The leader's glowing eyes softened for a moment, as though he respected their decision. "Good. You will train. You will fight. You will become part of the Iron Choir, and you will wield the power of the Ascendants. But know this, once you join us, there's no going back. The Varnok will come for you, for all of us." Lyra nodded, her heart racing with adrenaline. She could feel the weight of their decision, the gravity of what they were about to undertake. The future of humanity rested in their hands now. "We're ready," she said. The leader stepped back, signaling to the others. "Then let's begin. The war starts now." With those words, the cavern seemed to come alive with energy. The Titan's bones glowed brighter, and the relics hummed louder, as if recognizing their decision. Humanity's time had come. The Iron Choir had risen, and the galaxy would soon feel their thunder. The days that followed were filled with tension. The Iron Choir, a force unlike any Lyra had ever seen, worked quickly to prepare for the inevitable. Their training was brutal, an endless cycle of combat drills, strategy sessions, and simulations. Lyra's body ached at the end of every day, and even Caleb's usually unshakable confidence began to falter. But it wasn't the physical strain that weighed heavily on her mind. It was the knowledge that the Varnok were coming, and they were coming fast. Lyra sat in the dimly lit command room, staring at the holographic map in front of her. The map showed dozens of planets, each marked with a red dot. Targets. Each one had been swept clean by the Varnok in their never-ending campaign of conquest. Humanity's last refugee was now the final battleground. The Iron Choir's headquarters, a hidden base beneath the surface of an ancient planet, was the last line of defense. The only remaining hope for survival. They had no choice but to fight. As she studied the map, the door to the command room slid open. Caleb walked in, his face grim. His usual easygoing demeanor had been replaced by a cold, focused intensity. "Lyra," he said, his voice low, "it's time." She turned to him, her heart racing. "Is it happening?" Caleb nodded. "The Varnok fleet is inbound. They'll be in orbit within hours." Lyra's mind raced. This was it. The moment they had been preparing for, the moment that would determine the future of humanity. And she knew that if they failed, it would mean the end of everything. But she also knew that they weren't fighting just for survival. They were fighting for something greater, for the legacy of the Ascendants, for a chance to reclaim their place in the galaxy. The leader of the Iron Choir, who went by the name Commander Kyle, had gathered them all for one final briefing. Lyra and Caleb joined the others in the war room, where the commander stood in front of a massive display screen, his stern face illuminated by the red glow of the holographic images. "The Varnok think they can crush us easily," Kale began, his voice steady but filled with a quiet fury. "They think we're just a small resistance, a nuisance. But they are wrong." He looked each member of the choir in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "We are the last hope of humanity. We are the ones who will make them regret underestimating us. Today, we strike first." The room went silent. Every member of the Iron Choir knew what this meant. It was a one-way mission. If they didn't succeed, there would be no second chance. Lyra felt a knot form in her stomach. She had never been this close to a battle of this magnitude. She had fought before, she had fought for survival, for her friends, for her family. But this was different. The stakes were higher now. "We've uncovered their weaknesses," Kale continued. "Their fleets are powerful, but they rely on a central command structure. If we can take down their flagship, we can cripple their entire fleet. It's risky, but it's our only chance." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "We have the Ascendant's technology on our side. The Titan's bones, the relics we've uncovered, will give us an advantage. We will strike them where they least expect it." Lyra looked around the room. There was no hesitation in anyone's eyes. These were not just soldiers. They were survivors, warriors who had faced the Varnok before and lived to tell the tale. And they were ready to face them again. Kale's voice broke through her thoughts. Lyra, Caleb, you're with me. We're taking the assault team to the flagship. The rest of you will hold the line here. We need to make sure the Varnok don't escape. We need to finish this, once and for all. Caleb nodded firmly. Understood. Lyra felt the weight of the mission settle in her chest. It was a heavy burden, but it was one she was willing to bear. The plan was set. The time for preparation was over. The war was about to begin. As they left the command room, Lyra felt her nerves tighten. There was no turning back now. The Varnok were coming, and they would not stop until they had crushed every last vestige of resistance. But the Iron Choir had the Ascendant's power. And with it, they would make the Varnok regret ever crossing paths with humanity. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Lyra suited up, her armor clicking into place with a familiar weight. It wasn't as sleek as the Varnok's advanced tech, but it was sturdy, reliable, and human-made. She wasn't going into this battle unprepared. She would not be the one to falter. Caleb was already at the control station, helping coordinate the final preparations. His fingers flew over the holographic controls, ensuring every last detail of their assault was accounted for. "We've got the intel," he muttered under his breath. "We'll hit them hard and fast." There's no time for subtlety. Lyra stepped up beside him, taking one last look at the holographic map. The Varnok fleet had already entered the system. They had no time to waste. "Let's do this," she said, her voice steady but filled with anticipation. The command to launch was given, and the shuttle lifted off the surface of the planet, cutting through the atmosphere with a deafening roar. Outside, the sky was dark, filled with the looming presence of the Varnok fleet, a massive armada of warships. Each ship was a fortress, a symbol of the Varnok's unyielding power. But Lyra wasn't afraid. Not anymore. As the shuttle breached the atmosphere and sped toward the fleet, she could feel the tension in the air. This was it. The Varnok would feel the wrath of the Accord. Their time was over. But as the flagship came into view, a dark realization settled over her. They weren't alone. A new enemy, far more terrifying than anything they had faced before, emerged from the shadows of the Varnok fleet. The shape was unlike any ship Lyra had seen. It was massive, shifting in ways that defied logic, as though it were alive. And in the center of it, a bright, terrible light pulsed an energy unlike anything they had ever encountered. The Iron Choir's plan had just shifted. The war had escalated. And this was the true beginning of humanity's fight for survival. The sky above was filled with chaos. Explosions lit up the vast emptiness of space as the Iron Choir's assault force surged toward the heart of the Varnok Armada. The flagship, a massive, shifting warship that defied all logic, loomed large before them like a dark, monstrous shadow. Lyra could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the realization that everything every battle fought, every sacrifice made had led to this single, defining moment. This was the turning point. If they failed now, everything would be lost. The shuttle's controls hummed in her hands, its systems linked directly to her thoughts. Caleb sat beside her, his face taut with concentration as he focused on the approaching enemy fleet. "We're almost there," he said, his voice tight. "The flagship's shields are down to 30%. We'll need to hit it hard to break through." Lyra didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her mind was already racing ahead, calculating their next move, trying to anticipate the Varnok's every step. The Iron Choir had trained for this. They had prepared for this battle, for the day when humanity would stand against its oppressors and show the galaxy that they were not just survivors, but warriors. The shuttle shuddered violently as a barrage of plasma fire erupted from the flagship. It was powerful, precise, and deadly, but they had expected this. Lyra gritted her teeth as she steered the shuttle hard to the left, narrowly avoiding a deadly energy beam that passed inches from the hull. Caleb was already setting their weapons to return fire. "I've got this," he said, his hands flying over the controls. With a sharp burst of energy, the shuttle's weapons fired back, targeting the flagship's weaker side. A massive explosion rocked the Varnok ship, but the enemy wasn't finished. From the flagship's belly, a swarm of smaller ships launched, a deadly cloud of fighters intent on destroying the Iron Choir's assault team before they could land. "We need to move fast," Lyra said, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "I'll create a diversion. You take the shuttle in." Caleb nodded, knowing what had to be done. Without another word, Lyra slammed the throttle forward, sending the shuttle into a high-speed dive toward the flagship's lower hull. The smaller enemy fighters were already swarming around them, but Lyra's movements were precise, calculated. She dodged, weaved, and fired back, each shot finding its mark. The fighters were fast, but they were no match for the Iron Choir's resolve. As the shuttle dove deeper, Lyra felt the rush of adrenaline pump through her veins. The moment had arrived. The Varnok had underestimated them, and now they would see what humanity was capable of. The flagship was just ahead. The shuttle's targeting systems locked onto its outer defenses, and Lyra fired, sending a devastating volley of plasma beams toward the hull. The flagship's shields flickered and flared, but they held barely. "We've got a hole," Caleb said, his voice tense. "I'm taking us in." The shuttle plunged into the breach, racing toward the ship's core. Every instinct told Lyra to hold back, to wait for the perfect moment. The moment was now. With a swift movement, she sent the shuttle into a sharp climb, avoiding another barrage of enemy fire, and found herself heading straight for the flagship's core. The doors to the hangar opened, and they slipped inside, barely evading the last wave of fire from the enemy. The shuttle landed with a heavy thud, the sounds of battle echoing outside. Lyra and Caleb quickly unbuckled and moved toward the rear hatch. As the hatch opened, they were met by a squad of Iron Choir soldiers, their faces hidden behind helmets, their weapons at the ready. The fight was far from over. The flagship was massive, its corridors dimly lit and filled with the hum of unseen machinery. The walls seemed to pulse with a strange, almost organic energy, as if the ship itself were alive. "We need to get to the command center," Kale's voice crackled over their comms. "Take out their central control. Destroy the heart of the ship." Lyra didn't hesitate. She gestured for the team to follow her, and together they moved through the winding corridors, their boots echoing in the silence. The Varnok were everywhere patrolling, guarding, waiting. But the Iron Choir had learned their tactics, and they moved swiftly, methodically, clearing every obstacle in their path. It was clear that the enemy was desperate. As they neared the command center, Lyra could feel the air growing colder. The presence of something dark and powerful pressed in on her, a feeling she hadn't encountered before. This was no ordinary ship. It was a weapon, a tool of destruction, and it had a mind of its own. The moment they reached the command center, they found it an entity, a being far beyond anything they had imagined. It was humanoid in shape, but its form was twisted, unnatural. Its eyes glowed with an eerie, cold light, and it spoke in a voice that echoed through the room, sending shivers down Lyra's spine. "You are the ones who dared to defy us," the voice rasped, as if the words themselves were a curse. "You are nothing but beasts, unworthy of the stars." Lyra's heart raced. This was the true face of the Varnok, the thing that had controlled them all, the force behind their conquest. And now it was staring them down, speaking to them with contempt. But Lyra wasn't afraid. "Not anymore." "We're not beasts," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "We are humanity. And we're done running." The entity's laugh was cold, filled with malice. "You will learn the true meaning of defeat, creature. The Varnok are eternal." Lyra raised her weapon, her finger tightening on the trigger. The battle had reached its peak. The entity's eyes flared with dark energy, and for a moment it seemed as if the very air around them was about to collapse. But just as the power surged toward her, Caleb's voice cut through the tension. "Now, Lyra." With a sharp, fluid motion, Lyra fired. The blast hit the entity square in the chest, and the room erupted in a burst of white-hot energy. For a moment, everything was silent. And then, The entity collapsed, its twisted form falling to the floor with a resounding thud. The ship's systems began to power down. The Varnok flagship was crippled. They had done it. But the fight was far from over. As Lyra and Caleb stood over the fallen entity, the comms crackled once more. Mission accomplished. Kale's voice came through, filled with relief. The Varnok fleet is in disarray. We've won, but this war is far from over. Lyra glanced at Caleb, her heart still racing. They had won today, but the Varnok had not been defeated. Not yet. The galaxy had called them beasts. But now, humanity had shown them that they were so much more. The war had just begun, and the Iron Choir would lead the charge. They would rise, and this time, the galaxy would know their name.